It is 10:40 p.m. and I am just now starting this. Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Die Hard MMA podcast. I'm your host as always, Clint McLean. So I do have to apologize, ladies and gentlemen. This episode is going to be a little bit more boring than normal. I've been working overtime like a madman at work, and like I said, it is 10:40 p.m. and I gotta crack this thing out. So we've got an episode this week. It is my anniversary week, so this week I don't really have as much free time. We're going out of town this weekend and dropping the little monster off with my parents. So little sidebar there. That's why I'm a little rushed this week. So we're gonna burn right through this thing. Quick recap of last week, UFC Nashville. We went 3-4 for plus 1.69 units. That's right, somehow we still managed to pull profit out last week, all thanks to Anthony Showtime Pettis and that ridiculous knockout punch that he landed against Wonderboy Thompson. You have no idea how nutso I went on that. We were looking at posting a big fat negative, and I hate doing that. So it was a massive finish that saved our entire night, and boy did I love it. Just a couple quick notes to recap that last fight. Hill by decision was a mistake. Randa Marcos completely outclassed her. Hill didn't look like she even wanted to be in there, so I got to apologize for making that bet. Alexis Davis, she did not follow the game plan. She had an incredible ground advantage, and that was obvious in that fight, but she decided to keep it standing, and she lost the decision as well. That one, I really feel like she could have taken it down and gotten it done by submission. Vera inside the distance killed it. That one was the easiest pick of the entire night. JJ Aldrich, I really think we got value with our plus 195 on that one. She completely dominated that fight in the first round. She got caught by one big punch, and I would dare say to call it a lucky punch in the second round. She was controlling the distance just like I said she would, and I think she was well on her way to winning a decision victory. We also nailed Hussier Formiga. He should have been the favorite in that fight. He was far more skilled than his opponent, and just that threat of the knockout punch was not enough. We got some serious value there. And if you follow me on Twitter, you actually jumped on Peterson trying to fade Violent Bob Ross because of his nasty weigh-in. And unfortunately, that didn't pan out. Bob Ross still showed up and got it done. If you only followed the podcast picks, you're actually plus 2.69 units rather than plus 1.69 units because you dodged that bullet there on Peterson. And I did already mention Anthony Pettis. That wraps the recap up. It was another good night. Could have been a huge night for us, but we missed a couple of spots just barely, but you know what? We profited. Profit is profit. I'll take it. So this week we're headed over to the city of brotherly love, UFC Philly, and unfortunately we don't have anything on the early prelims for this fight card. We're going to go to the preliminary card. The first fight kicking off the preliminary card is Kevin Holland versus Gerald Meerschaert. Kevin Holland is 13-4-0 facing Gerald Meerschaert, who's 28-10-0. There is a huge experience difference here. I will give you that, but I've been very impressed with Kevin Holland since he stormed onto the UFC scene. He had a good showing in Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, took a last-minute replacement fight against Thiago Santos, and actually looked pretty good in that fight. He impressed me. The fact that, honestly, Thiago Santos KOs everybody, and the fact that Holland was able to get in there and kind of show some of his skill set and then not get put away, a guy the caliber of Thiago Santos, leads me to believe that he actually is far more skilled than we may be able to see so far from his fights. He showed us that in his fight against John Phillips, his very next UFC outing. He won by submission in the third round. I'm pretty high on this kid. I think he's going to be improving steadily. So our first pick of the night is we're going to roll with Kevin Holland. Right now, I can find Kevin Holland at minus 190. It looks like we can get him minus 190 over at 5 times. Let's lock that up as our first pick of the night. We're going to roll with Kevin Holland. I don't blame anybody for taking him inside the distance because I do think he can submit Gerald Meerschaert, and you can actually get Holland inside the distance at plus 102 over at 5 dimes. So that's about even money to take him inside the distance, but I don't know that I trust him quite that much just yet. I'm going to lay the minus 190 with him just in case this thing goes to decision. And just like that, we're on to the main card. So the first fight of the night on the main card that we're going to have any kind of a look at is the first fight, Sodiq Yusuff fighting Shayman Moraes. I have a slight lean to Yusuff here. I don't know that I'm ready to quite pull the trigger because Shayman Moraes is another, new type of fighter who's kind of unproven. That's just going to be a lean for you guys. I like Sodiq Yusuff just because of his power. I may end up on him. Keep an eye out for my Twitter. I can't give him official here, but I do want to give you the lean just in case you feel like rolling with him, okay? I did miss one. I'm going to backtrack to the preliminary card for just a second here. Ross Pearson is fighting Desmond Green, and Desmond Green is one of those fighters who kind of fights down to his opponent. Ross Pearson is on a terrible, terrible run. He's on a horrible losing streak. His record's all the way down to 20-15. He really is wrapping up his career, and I think he's just kind of showing up for a paycheck at this point. The only catch here is that right now you can get Ross Pearson by decision, by 3-round decision at plus 510. I may sprinkle that simply because Desmond Green is one of those fighters, like I said, he does not overwhelm his opponents. He fights to the level of his opponent, and Ross Pearson could squeak out a split decision here. So I may sprinkle that. Just another lean for you guys if you need some gamble on there. Not an official pick, but something I thought you should be aware of. Back to the main card, we're going to take a look at Kennedy Nzechukwu. I can't say that. Nzechukwu. He's an undefeated fighter stepping in here to fight Paul the Bear Jew Craig, which is another one of my favorite MMA nicknames here. Kennedy is brand new on the UFC scene. He is explosive, he is athletic, and I think he's got a bright future in the sport. The only thing we've seen from him is his Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series. Of course, he's got a bunch of KOs on the regional scene, but you can't put a whole ton of stock into that. He hasn't been tested or proven just yet. So 6-0, very impressive, and a bright future. However, the thing I noticed in watching his fights is that he's got terrible, terrible ground defense. And that's where Paul Bear Jew Craig really shines, is he is very, very talented on the ground. He's completely legit on the ground. He's got 9 submission wins. Of his 10 wins, 9 of them are by submission. So he basically is finish or bust. And he's on a 4-1 run in the UFC right now, so not very impressive, not looking too great. However, the 2 wins that he does have in the UFC both did come by submission, and the losses came to Tyson Pedro, Khalil Rountree, and Jim Crute. Jim Crute is a guy, I actually bet Paul Craig, I believe, when Jim Crute was fighting him, because I thought Jim Crute was a little overhyped in that spot, and he proved me wrong. I was on Jim Crute in his last fight where he wrecked Smiling Sam Alvey, and I had him inside the distance on that one. So I'm all over Jim Crute these days, but I was not aware of just how good he was back then. And one of the strengths Jim Crute has is his ground game. So somebody like Paul Craig was just completely overmatched in that fight, and he didn't really have a way to win it. So this time, however, Paul Craig is being a little disrespected. His back is up against the wall here. Being on this 3-1 run that he's on, it's not looking good for him as far as a UFC career goes. So he really needs to step up and win this fight. And against a guy like Kennedy, I really think he can get this fight to the ground. And if it does get to the ground, I just don't see Kennedy getting back up. Paul Craig has got that finishing attack style ground game, and I don't see that Kennedy has been tested on that level. So even if Paul Craig doesn't get the finish on the mat, he will be able to control Kennedy on the ground and maybe even grind out his first ever decision win, simply because he needs the win. He doesn't need to be flashy. He doesn't need to show off. He just needs that W next to his name. And we're getting a nice price on him. Over at 5 dimes, you can get Craig at plus 185, and I think he's a solid underdog play in this spot. We're going to lock up Paul Craig plus 185 for our first underdog play of the night. Rolling right along, we've got our first women's fight of the evening that we're interested in. There are a couple others on the card, but honestly, they're a little too sketchy for me to touch. We've got Karolina Kowalkiewicz fighting Michelle Waterson. Now, Karolina is one of my favorite female fighters, and she's 12-3-0. Michelle Waterson, the karate hottie, which best women's MMA name, bar none. She is 16-6-0, and she's on a little bit of a tear right now. I have to be completely honest. I thought Michelle Waterson was overhyped. I have faded her last 2 fights in a row, and she has showed up and punched me in the face both times. She fought Courtney Casey and managed a split decision there. She fought Felice Herrig, who I'm actually pretty high on, and I believed that Felice Herrig would have the grappling advantage, the size, and strength advantage, and Michelle Waterson just completely out-techniqued her, and she was able to hold her own in the strength and grappling departments as well. So that one really showed up and surprised me, and that one actually really impressed me. I know a lot of people aren't so high on Felice Herrig, but considering the way that Michelle won that fight, it actually gave her a lot of credit in my book. Now, Carolina, she was one of the undefeated women's fighters that was really rising high in the UFC until she ran into Joanna. Joanna was at the height of her power at that point, and losing a decision to her, there's really no shame in that. However, her next fight, she fought Claudia Gadelha, and she lost by first round submission. It was kind of a one-sided beating. She rebounded well to win 2 decisions after that over Jodie Esquibel and also over Felice Herrig. However, she got brutally KO'd by Jessica Andrade in the first round in her last fight back in September of 2018. Now, this is the angle that I'm going to take on this. I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but we don't know where Carolina's head's at. She was supposed to be the next big thing. She was going to challenge Joanna, potentially take the belt, and she was going to be a regular title contender, but she has been proven that she is not in the top 5 of her division. The girls that are at the top of the division have all just wrecked her. And I don't know how she's going to mentally rebound from that, especially after that last fight where she took such damage from Jessica Andrade. She may be a little gun-shy when she gets in there. This is kind of a striker versus grappler situation where Carolina is the one with the advantage on the feet by far, and Michelle Waterson is going to have the ground advantage. It all comes down to whether or not Michelle is going to be able to get that takedown, and it also depends on how hungry Carolina is coming into this fight. If she's coming back in and is guns blazing, ready to show the world that she should still be in the top 5, she may be able to put Michelle Waterson out or just stick and move her to death and bust her up. However, if she's at all cracked, Michelle Waterson is really riding high right now. She's got confidence like nothing else. She's out there to make a statement, and honestly, she's not even that old. She's only 33 herself. Even though she's been in the game forever, she seems to have kind of a second career resurgence right now. The UFC actually did a really cool spot on her that I suggest you go and watch. It's really interesting, and she's got a lot of fun interactions with her daughter, and it really shows that she is legit and she is going for it right now. The only thing I want to caution you on is that I haven't been right on a Michelle Waterson fight for the last 3 or 4 in a row. So the fact that I'm going to take Michelle Waterson here, maybe you want to fade me and go the other way simply because I don't seem to be able to figure this girl out. However, we are getting a dog line, and you guys know how I like to roll. Whenever we've got a close fight, the skill sets are close, there's not a one-sided opinion either way. I like to roll with the dog because it's going to get hairy. It's probably going to be a split decision, and I do see a path to victory for Michelle. Carolina also is suspect on the ground game, so she could get it to the ground, she could control her there, she could submit her there. Either way, we're going to go ahead and take a stab here. We've got plus 129 over at Pinnacle. Let's roll with Michelle Waterson and hope I can get one right for once. Next up, we've got Josh Emmett versus Michael Johnson at 145 pounds. This is a super intriguing fight. Michael Johnson is a Ultimate Fighter alumni, and we've basically gotten to watch him grow up in front of us. He was a bar-nothing kind of wrestler, and then he's grown into an explosive, powerful striker. And he was looking like he was going to be a title challenger until he ran into Beneil Dariush back in 2015. Since then, he has gone on kind of a skid. 2 losses, and then somehow managed to KO Dustin Poirier. Go figure. MMA is a weird game. He rebounded with 3 losses after that to Khabib, Gaethje, and Elkins, and then he got a couple of wins over Andre Fili and Artem Lobov. Now, the thing here is you may say that he's kind of rebounded, he's back on track, winning over Andre Fili and Lobov, but Fili really has kind of disappointed himself. He's another guy that has never lived up to the hype that everyone expected from him. And let's face it, Artem Lobov, even though he's the GOAT, he's the greatest of all time, he was only in the UFC because he's friends with Conor McGregor. He legitimately has a losing record. I think he's the only male UFC fighter on the roster, at least until he put his 2 weeks notice in. I think he was the only UFC fighter on the roster that had a legitimate losing record. He's 13-15, so he does not belong in the UFC. And Michael Johnson beat him by decision in his last fight back in October, and it was kind of a back and forth hairy fight. It was obvious Michael Johnson had him, but at the same time, Artem Lobov didn't look bad in that fight. And if you can make Artem Lobov look decent, I don't know where you're at as a fighter. Josh Emmett is 13-2. His only loss is one coming by split decision to Desmond Green back in 2017. And then he just recently ran into the buzzsaw that is Jeremy Stevens and had a second round brutal, vicious KO. I see a lot of people online going with the whole that KO was life-changing. You never know how a guy's going to come back from that. So they're all loading up on Michael Johnson because he's going to have a slight speed advantage, and then they think that Josh Emmett's basically going to be gun-shy coming back. I really think Josh Emmett's an animal. I think he's going to be the kind of guy that wants to come back, shut everybody up, and prove that he is back on the scene and, again, a legitimate title challenger. I also am completely unimpressed with Michael Johnson at this stage of his career. I think it's completely obvious that he doesn't belong in the top 10 every time he faces somebody who's named, besides Dustin Poirier, who's fighting for the title next, which, again, what the hell happened there? He's basically gotten stomped. So I just don't see it. I think Josh Emmett is going to bounce back and he's going to be on the rise. I think Michael Johnson's going to continue to fall, and honestly, I see him wrapping up his career relatively soon and being one of those guys that fades off into Bellator and then bare knuckle boxing where he can have a little success again. I'm going to go ahead and roll with my boy Josh Emmett, thinking he gets back on the winning track and shows that he's going to come back and put the division on notice. Over at Heritage, we can get him at even money still, plus 100. Unfortunately, we're a little bit late to scoop up the actual dog money on this one, so I apologize for the late notice. We could have got him at a slight dog price a little bit ago, but we'll take it. Even money. Josh Emmett, let's go. The co-main event of the evening is one that I've struggled with quite a bit. David Branch is fighting Jack the Joker Hermansson, and David Branch is one of those guys that was, should have been in the UFC a long time ago, but didn't get his shot until it was way too late. He came on the scene and he looked pretty decent, and it looked like maybe he was going to be a title challenger, and then he ran into the top tier of the division, and he's probably just too old. Honestly, I think we missed his prime as far as being fans of the UFC goes. He did get TKO'd by Luke Rockhold. He KO'd Thiago Santos, which that should tell you something. Thiago Santos is the man these days, and David Branch was able to KO him, so he's got some legitimate power. His ground game is slick. But then he got wrecked by Jared Cannonier in round 2 in his last fight back in November. He's coming back to face Jack the Joker Hermansson, and Jack the Joker is just a younger, tougher version of himself, basically. Jack's only got a couple losses in the UFC, one to Thiago Santos by KO, one to Cesar Ferreira by arm triangle choke, and again, those are those kinds of losses that you kind of got to take with a little bit of a grain of salt. Cesar Ferreira can submit basically anybody. He caught Jack Hermansson. Thiago Santos can knock out anybody. He caught Jack Hermansson. Okay. The rest of his fights, he's finished everybody else he's fought in the UFC except for his very first fight against Scott Askham, which he won by decision. I think Jack Hermansson is, again, this is one of those fights where it's a pathway fight. Jack Hermansson is on his way up. He is the future. He's going to continue on in the division from here. David Branch is 37. His career is winding down, especially in the Luke Rockhold fight where he tapped to strikes. It's very obvious that he doesn't want to get hurt, which I can't blame him. The dude's got a family. He's made his money. He's trying to cash in on the end of his career here, but he is not the young, hungry fighter that's going to go out there and put himself in harm's way to fight for your money. And that's really a big thing to me. If we're going to lay a bet on this guy, we have to know that he is going to fight for us. And David Branch will quit if things get hairy against Jack Hermansson to protect himself. Again, you can't blame the guy. You don't want these guys going brain dead, so that's totally fine. But it makes it to where I can't bet on him. So right now, we can get Jack the Joker Hermansson. Best line we can get right now is minus 118 at Pinnacle, so let's lock that up. Minus 118 for Jack the Joker Hermansson. The main event of the evening is going to be Edson Barbosa versus Justin Gaethje, and this is guaranteed violence. This is a fight that could and potentially should be on a pay-per-view card. I would shell out $50 to watch these two guys go at it. They're both damage machines. Nobody can stand in front of them and last very long, honestly. Like, the output of violence that these guys can put on is just next level. Edson Barbosa, it looked like he was done. I bet against him in his fight against Daniel Hooker, and he really showed up and shut me up. He showed that he is not faded, his chin is not gone, and he legitimately still has the will to fight and be in the top end of the division. That brutal beating that he put on Dan Hooker is something else. It became hard to watch that fight because that poor kid is so tough. He just kept marching forward, and Barbosa knocked him to the stomach and to the ribs over and over and over. They should have thrown in the towel way before, because I really think Dan Hooker took some mileage off of his life coming at Barbosa with nothing except walking forward and trying to touch his chin, and it just wasn't happening. Barbosa was able to backpedal and cut angles and get good spots. However, I think Justin Gaethje is actually a better version of Dan Hooker. He's going to cut better angles. He's got better footwork. He's far more experienced, and honestly, he's far more violent. Justin Gaethje is the one that he fought for the violence belt against Dustin Poirier and Eddie Alvarez. And unfortunately, he lost both of those fights, but there's not a whole lot of shame in that. They both went to war in those fights. Eddie Alvarez and Dustin Poirier are just slightly more technical versions of Justin Gaethje. They were able to clip him. He came back and showed up against James Vick. Another fight where he really shut the doubters up. Round 1 KO over James Vick, and James Vick had talked a bunch of shit before that fight. So that was a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. You always got to love when one of the fighters runs their mouth and then gets shut up. So this fight is super close. If you say that you can see Edson Barbosa backing up, throwing spinning shit, and then catching Justin Gaethje as he's coming in for 2 rounds and KOing him, that's fine. I understand that. That could definitely happen. If you see Justin Gaethje marching forward and walking down Edson Barbosa and then KOing him in the 3rd round, that's fine. I can see that too. The only guarantee is that this fight isn't going the distance. Unfortunately, that line is unbettable. So the thing here is, personally, I believe that Justin Gaethje has more tools. Edson Barbosa's got a great kicking game, but if you get inside of him and you pressure him, kind of like Tony Ferguson did. Tony Ferguson is really the one that opened up the gate to how to beat Edson Barbosa. Dan Hooker had the right idea, but he didn't have the tools to implement that game plan and actually pull out the win. Justin Gaethje is going to be able to. That's what he does. He breaks every single one of his opponents except for 2. So I really think he's going to give Edson Barbosa flashbacks of Khabib and Tony Ferguson. He's going to march him down if he gets the takedown. Justin Gaethje is actually a very accomplished wrestler, and that's Edson Barbosa's Achilles heel, is the wrestling. Justin Gaethje is also not the guy that's going to stand at his opponent's range and let them pick him apart. He will take a shot to give a shot, which means he will march through that kick and he will land a bomb on Barbosa's chin. Gaethje's the kind of guy that's just going to keep coming. He will never stop coming until you shut the lights off, and he's got surprisingly good defensive striking, and facing a guy like Edson Barbosa that has to wind up on all of his shots, I think he'll be able to get off first. For all of those reasons, I'm going to roll with Justin Gaethje, and this is a situation where either side that you pick in this fight, you want to make sure you take the inside the distance prop. It's free value. There's no way this fight's going to decision. One guy is going to break the other. It's a 5-round fight with 2 guys that rarely ever get past round 2. So I'm going to take Justin Gaethje inside the distance at plus 160 over at 5 times. And again, I apologize for the speedy review of this card and the shortness of the podcast. I know there was a whole lot of cool stuff that happened this week, like Conor McGregor, retiring, and then we could have talked a lot more about the previous fights. I could have done more in-depth review of these ones, so I really apologize, guys. Bear with me here. Next week will be better. I will be back. I promise. To recap our action for the evening, we're going to pick the night up with Holland at minus 190. We're going to roll the dice with Paul the Bear Jew Craig at plus 185. We are going to hope that my losing streak is over and take the Karate Hottie Michelle Watterson at plus 129 to get it done. We're hoping Josh Emmett comes back with his head in one piece at even money. We will take Jack the Joker Hermanson to prove that he is the future of the division, and we will bet on violence with Justin Gaethje inside the distance at plus 160. I gave a couple other leans on the card if you're looking for some additional action. A couple of favorites, you can parlay them together. Give me a follow over on Twitter at DieHardMMAPod. I love chatting with everybody. I love sweating the fights live with you all. I do this shit for free. I do this shit for fun. I will be putting my PayPal in the description of all of these episodes, so if you like what I do, I am a 9-to-5er. I do have a family to support. Tips would always be appreciated to support the show and make sure this is something we can keep on doing. Good luck, everybody. Let's cash. Let's make some money. Let's roll.